Before I begin, here's a brief note on what you're about to hear. This is a work of historical fiction inspired by the homesteading era of the American West. While the building techniques describe the harsh winters of the San Juan Mountains and the realities of company mining towns are based on real history, the characters and specific events in this story are fictional. With that said, let us begin. The third stone broke the window. Sigrid Vesterlund did not flinch. She did not look up. She kept counting the silver dollars on the kitchen table. 47 of them. That was all that remained. $47 for 23 years of her father's life underground. Outside, a woman's voice tore through the cold October air. "Daughter of a killer, get out of here!" Glass lay on the floor like fallen teeth. The wind came through the broken window and lifted the corner of the tablecloth. Sigrid pressed her palm flat against the wood. She felt the cold travel up her wrist. At her feet, Bjorn growled. Low. Quiet. The old Norwegian elk hound was 8 years old now. One of his eyes had gone milky with age, but his hearing was perfect. He turned his head toward the window, then back towards Sigrid, asking the question dogs ask. Should we fight? Should we run? She placed one hand on his head. Not yet, Gamel Ven, she whispered. Not yet, old friend. 3 months later, the woman who threw that stone would kneel in the snow outside Sigrid's granite shelter and beg to be let in. But Sigrid did not know that yet. She only knew that her father was dead, that the town of Silvercrest hated her, that she had until the 1st of November to leave the company house, and that the mountains around her were already turning white at the peaks. The notice arrived an hour later. It came in the hand of a young man named Halbrook. He was 24 years old, soft-handed, visibly miserable about his errand. He stood at the door of the Vesterlund house with the envelope held in front of him like something poisonous. Sigrid took it without expression. She noted the Denver postmark. She noted the wax seal of the Silvercrest Mining Company. She stepped back from the doorway without inviting him in. She read the letter standing at the kitchen table, the way she read anything that required her full attention. Standing up, one hand flat on the wood, weight forward, as if she might need to move quickly afterward. The letter was 4 paragraphs. She read all 4 twice. When she looked up, Halbrook was still in the doorway, his hat turning slowly in his hands. He began to speak. About the company's sympathy, about a wagon that could be arranged, about how women in her situation often returned to family. Sigrid let him finish. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Where exactly am I supposed to go, Mr. Halbrook? He looked at the floor. He suggested boarding houses in Denver. He mentioned that perhaps a husband could be found even now. Sigrid's voice did not rise. It did not crack. She was factual. She was 20 years old. Her mother had died of fever when she was 8. Her father had been her only family for 12 years. Magnus Vesterlund's only brother in Norway had not written since 1875. She had $47 to her name, and the entire town of Silvercrest believed her father had killed 7 men. Halbrook looked at the floor harder. He was not a bad man. She could see that. He was young and he was doing a job that someone above him had decided was his responsibility. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that was not in the prepared speech. He said it in a lower voice. Without looking at her directly, the way a person releases words sideways because they cannot say them straight. Miss Vesterlund, I probably should not be telling you this, but there is a Mr. Crow from the Denver engineering office. He will be coming in the spring to review the records from the July incident. If you were still in the area by then... He stopped. He shook his head. I am sorry. I genuinely am. Good luck to you. He was down the path and around the bend before she could decide whether to call after him. She did not call after him. She stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at the place where he had been. Then she went back inside. She put water on the stove. She read the letter a 3rd time. The terms were plain. She had until the 1st of November. Bjorn pressed his nose against her hand. She knelt down beside him on the kitchen floor. She put her forehead against his. Papa would know what to do, Bjorn. The dog made a small sound. Not quite a whine. Something older. Something that understood. Her eyes stayed dry. She had not cried since July when they brought what remained of her father up from the tunnel. She had not cried at the funeral where the preacher had used the word negligence 3 times. She had not cried in the weeks afterward when neighbors who had been at her father's table for Christmas suddenly crossed the road to avoid her. She was not going to spend whatever came next leaking. Leaking was what you did when you thought something might still be salvageable. She was past that. What she needed now was not release, it was arithmetic. She got out paper. She wrote numbers. Denver, $47. The cheapest available boarding house, which Eldred Thornberry at the general store had once mentioned, ran about $7 a month if you were lucky and willing to share a room with 3 other women. That gave her perhaps 6 months of shelter, with nothing left over for food. Work in Denver, at 20 years old, with no formal education beyond what her father had taught her at the kitchen table, with no trade, with the name Vesterlund attached to a mining disaster. The boarding houses hired girls who could scrub floors at 5 in the morning after already hauling coal since 4. She was strong, but she was also marked. The arithmetic did not work. Letters to distant relations. Her father had a brother in Norway, but they had not exchanged words in 8 years. By the time a letter crossed the Atlantic and a response came back, November would be long gone, and she would already need to have been somewhere. The arithmetic did not work. Marriage. She held this option in her mind long enough to assess it honestly. There were unmarried men in Silvercrest. There were widowers. The prospect of attaching herself to a stranger out of desperation in the span of 3 weeks with winter coming was not something she examined with sentiment. She examined it as logistics. It was dangerous. It was unpredictable. It put her survival in someone else's hands. And no man in Silvercrest she knew would marry the daughter of Magnus Vesterlund. She crossed it off the list. That left the mountains. She did not write this option down at first. She sat with it. Her father had loved these mountains. He had spent his days off exploring ridgelines and creek beds and granite formations. He had come home from those walks the way other men came home from church, with light in his eyes, with his coat pockets full of stones. She pulled his wooden box out from under the bed. She had not opened it since August. The hinges creaked. Inside, she found his journals, his geological notes, a small bundle of letters tied with brown twine, a leather pouch she did not recognize. She opened the pouch first. Inside were 3 things. A folded copy of a letter dated April 14, 1883, addressed to the Silvercrest Mining Company management offices in Denver, a hand-drawn map of the western ridge above the camp, and a smaller note written in Norwegian in her father's careful hand, folded once, sealed with a drop of black wax. She opened the letter first. Her hands were steady. She read, and the world she had been living in for 3 months collapsed. Her father had not caused the tunnel collapse. Her father had tried to prevent it. The letter was a warning. Magnus Vesterlund had identified stress fractures in the supporting column of tunnel number 4. Not surface cracking, not normal settling, deep lateral splits in the direction that meant the column was failing. He had told his shift supervisor. The supervisor had said he was reading the rock wrong. So Magnus had done what any honest man would do. He had written to Denver. He had warned them, in April, 3 months before the collapse. Sigrid sat at the kitchen table with the letter in her hands and felt something shift inside her chest. Not grief, not yet. Something colder. The company had received this letter. Someone in Denver had read it, and someone had decided to do nothing. And then her father had died in the very collapse he had predicted. And then the company had told the town that Magnus Vesterlund was a careless drunk who had caused the deaths of 7 men. She read the letter a second time, a third, a fourth. Then she unfolded the map. It showed a section of the western ridge about a mile from the camp. A small symbol marked a specific point. Her father's handwriting in the margin read, Steinhütten, for when she needs it. Steinhütten, the stone shelter. Her father had told her stories about Steinhütten when she was a little girl. About her grandparents in the Setesdal Valley of Norway, about how the Vesterlund family had survived the brutal winter of 1838 when the temperature dropped to negative 52 degrees Fahrenheit by building shelters of granite tucked against the mountains, stone walls, natural ventilation, earth itself as insulation. The principle was simple, her father had said. Stone remembers heat. Wood forgets. Always stone. She had thought when he told her these stories that he was just remembering the old country. She had not understood that he was teaching her. She picked up the small folded note last, her father's seal in black wax. She broke it carefully. The handwriting was his. The language was Norwegian. Min datter, hvis du finder dette, de kommer for dig næste. Byg steinhytten. Overlev vinteren. Sandheden kommer i våren. She read it aloud, her voice low. My daughter, if you find this, they will come for you next. Build the Steinhütten. Survive the winter. The truth will come in the spring. The fire in the stove popped softly. Bjorn looked up at her. Sigrid put the note down on the table. She placed both her hands flat on the wood. She closed her eyes. Her eyes stayed dry. But for one long moment, she let herself feel what she had not let herself feel since July. She felt her father in the room. She felt him standing behind her chair the way he used to stand when she was a little girl doing her sums at the kitchen table. She felt his hand on her shoulder, heavy, warm, the hand of a man who had spent his whole life working stone. Tusen tak, Papa, she whispered. 1,000 thanks. Then she opened her eyes. She was 20 years old. She was alone. She had $47 and a dog and a winter coming. But she had something else now. She had a map. She had a warning. And she had a name. Mr. Crow. Spring. 3 weeks of October light. Then a winter to get through. Then a man from Denver who would want to hear the truth. She could survive that long. She could survive anything that long. Let me ask you something before we go any further. If you were Sigrid right now, 20 years old, no family, $47 in your pocket, a whole town that hates you, what would you choose? Would you board the wagon to Denver and disappear into a boarding house? Or would you climb up that mountain with nothing but your father's journal and a half-blind dog? I want you to think about it for a moment, because the choice she made next is the one that changed everything. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Sigrid chose the mountain. She left at first light the next morning. She carried her father's pack. She carried his map. Bjorn padded at her side, his breath visible in the cold air. The October sun was thin and clean. The aspens along the lower trail had already given up their leaves. The climb was harder than she had expected. Not because of the slope. She had been on this mountain 100 times, but because of what she was carrying with her. Not the pack. The other thing. The slow, cold weight of what her father had known, of what the company had done, of what they had taken from him, and from her, and from this town, and from 7 other families whose grief had been pointed in the wrong direction. She followed the map, past the second fork, west along the ridge, to a large split boulder her father had described as looking like a chair from the eastern approach. She found it. Then she dropped down the slope 50 yards southwest and stopped. At first she saw nothing. She pushed through a stand of scrub pine that scratched at her coat sleeves. The branches were stiff with cold. Bjorn forced his way through ahead of her, then stopped and barked once. She came up behind him, and there it was, a granite wall, worn smooth in places, dark with moss in others, and at the base of the wall, half hidden behind a fallen pine trunk and a growth of dry brush and opening. A cave, smaller looking than her father's notes had suggested, but unmistakably there. She lit the small torch she had brought. She pulled the brush aside. She moved the smaller pine trunk back. She stepped inside, and she stood very still. The ceiling arched above her, not low, not cramped. The chamber widened in its middle section to something broader than she had expected. The granite walls were dry. Dry, her father had written in his journal. Underlined twice. Completely dry despite a seasonal creek bed nearby. She held the torch up. On the right wall, about 2/3 of the way to the rear, she saw it. A narrow fissure in the granite, running from a point about 4 feet off the floor up into the ceiling, disappearing into darkness above. She held the torch close. The flame bent. Not from a draft at floor level. From the pull of the fissure itself, drawing air upward. The cave had a natural chimney. Her grandfather's Steinhütten in Setesdal had been built to use the chimney effect of mountain caves. It worked because cold air settled at the bottom of the chamber and warm air rose. If you had a vent at the top, the warm air left and pulled fresh air in through the bottom. You did not need a stovepipe through the roof. You did not need to puncture your shelter. The mountain itself did the work. Sigrid placed her palm against the granite wall. Cold, but not wet. She moved further in. At the rear of the chamber, she found something she had not expected. A circle of old ash, long dead, compressed into a gray disk on the stone floor. Beside it, a piece of canvas tarp folded into a rough rectangle stiff with age. Someone had been here before? Not recently. The tarp could have been 10 years old, but someone had sheltered here once. Bjorn sniffed the ash circle. He looked up at her. He gave a single soft woof, as if to say, "Friend." Sigrid moved past the ash. She walked to the rear wall. Her father's map had a final mark. A small X. Behind the ash circle, at the base of the wall. She knelt. She held the torch close. The wall looked solid, but there near the floor was a section of stone that looked slightly different, as if it had been placed there deliberately, fitted to look like part of the wall. She pried at it with her fingers. It came loose. Behind it was a small hollow, a space her father had carved into the granite, maybe a foot deep, lined with oilcloth to keep moisture out. Inside were three things: a small canvas bag, a folded leather portfolio, and a wooden box sealed with wax. Sigrid pulled them out one by one. In the canvas bag, she found rock samples, granite chips, each one labeled in her father's handwriting. Tunnel 4, Column 3, April 1883. Lateral fracture 7 inches deep. Physical evidence, the actual stones, from the actual column. That actually killed him. In the leather portfolio, she found a second copy of his April letter, and along with it a series of survey maps showing that the company's own engineers had identified the same fractures the previous February. 2 months before Magnus had even written his warning. The company had known. They had known since February. And they had done nothing for 5 months until the column came down and killed 7 men. In the wooden box, she found a letter, addressed to her, in her father's hand. My Sigrid, if you are reading this, then I am gone. Forgive me. I should have told you everything sooner, but I did not want you to be afraid. The men who run this mine are not honest men. They received my warning and they did nothing. If they realize that I kept copies, they will come for those copies, which means they will come for you. I have prepared this place, the Stein Hitten, build the wall, seal the entrance, survive the winter. In the spring, a man named Crow will come from Denver. He is honest. He has been investigating this company for 2 years. He will believe you. Until then, trust no one in Silvercrest, especially not Cyrus Marwick. He is the one who took the company's money. He is the one who will come first. I love you, daughter. Stone remembers heat. Wood forgets. Always Stone, your father. Sigrid sat back on her heels. She read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it back in the box. She placed the box back in the hollow. She replaced the stone. She brushed dust over the seam until it looked like part of the wall again. She stood up. She turned slowly in the lamplight. She read the cave with new eyes. This was not a hiding place. This was a fortress her father had prepared for her. He had known. For months, perhaps for years, he had known that something might happen to him. And he had prepared a place where his only daughter could survive. She would not waste it. She left the cave just before sundown. Bjorn padded at her heels. The October light was already going gold across the peaks. She came down the slope. She crossed the second fork. She started along the main trail back toward camp. That was when she saw him. A man standing 20 yards down the trail, big through the shoulders. A pickaxe leaned against his leg, watching her come. Cyrus Marwick, 44 years old, the senior shift man at Silvercrest, the man who had spoken loudest against her father at the funeral, the man whose voice had been the loudest in the chorus that called Magnus Vesterlund a drunk and a killer, the man she now knew who had taken the company's money to do it. Bjorn growled. Sigrid put her hand flat on the dog's head. Cyrus Marwick stepped onto the trail. He blocked her path. Miss Vesterlund, he said. Pretty cold to be wandering the high country. She did not answer. He smiled. It was not a friendly smile. I will be plain with you. The company is being more than fair letting you stay until the 1st of November. Some folks think that is too generous. Some folks think a girl in your position should already be gone. You understand. I understand, Sigrid said quietly. Good, because if you were thinking of staying, up here, in these mountains, through the winter, I would have to tell you, you would not last. Nobody lasts a winter in these mountains alone. The cold finds people. The cold finds them, and it keeps them. Bjorn's lips curled back from his teeth. A low rumble rose in his chest. Cyrus glanced at the dog. He shifted his weight. That is a fine dog, he said. Be a shame if anything happened to him. Sigrid lifted her chin. She looked directly into Cyrus Marwick's eyes. Blue eyes. Norwegian eyes. Her father's eyes. De will see, she said softly. You will see. Then she walked around him. She kept walking. She did not look back. Bjorn stayed at her heel, his head turned slightly behind, watching the man until they rounded the bend in the trail. When they were out of sight, Sigrid stopped. She placed one hand against a tree. She let her breath come out slow. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were not shaking. That night she sat at her kitchen table. The lamp burned low. The broken window had been boarded with a piece of pine from the woodpile. She wrote a list: a shovel, a pickaxe, a handsaw, a hammer, nails, a cast-iron stove with pipe, lime mortar, canvas, a lantern, oil, a good knife, food, flour, beans, salt pork, salt, sugar, coffee, baking powder, matches. She wrote estimated prices beside each item. She did the arithmetic. $38.50. That left her with $8.50. Not a comfortable margin, but a margin. She looked across the table at Bjorn. The old dog had laid his chin on his paws. His one good eye was watching her. His tail thumped once against the floor. Vi skal overleve gamle venn, she said. We will survive, old friend, you and me. Then she folded the list. She blew out the lamp. And for the first time since July, Sigrid Vesterlund slept through the night without waking. She walked into Eldred Thornberry's general store at 8:30 the next morning. Bjorn waited outside on the porch. Eldred was behind the counter. He was 58 years old, broad through the shoulders, hands like stones. He had run this store for 23 years. He looked up when she came in. His face did not change. For 3 months, Eldred Thornberry had treated her with the same cold formality as the rest of the town. He had sold her what she needed without conversation. He had not refused her, but he had not warmed to her either. She had assumed he was like all the others. She had been wrong. She walked to the counter. She placed her list on the wood between them. Eldred read it. He read it once. He read it a second time. Then he did something she had not seen him do in 3 months. He looked up at her, and his eyes were not cold. His eyes were wet. He looked past her to the door. He looked at the window. Then he stepped out from behind the counter. He walked to the door. He turned the bolt. He flipped the sign to read closed. He came back to the counter. Sigrid, he said. It was the first time he had spoken her first name since her father had died. His voice was quiet, steady. But there was something underneath it, something old and tired and pressed down. Sigrid, I owe you an apology. I owe you the biggest apology of my life. And I want you to know that everything I have done these past 3 months was to keep you alive, even when it looked like I was treating you like the rest of them. Sigrid did not speak. She felt something tighten in her throat. Your father, Eldred said, your father was the best friend I had in this town. For 6 years. We sat at this counter on Sunday afternoons, and we talked about stones, about building. He was a Norwegian stone man. I was a Cornish dry stone waller. We came to the same conclusions from 2 different countries. Stone remembers heat, wood forgets. We used to laugh about that. He paused. He swallowed. Magnus told me 3 weeks before he died that he had written to Denver about Tunnel 4. He told me he had kept copies. He told me where he had hidden them. He told me that if anything happened to him, his daughter would need help, but the help would have to be invisible, because the men who would come for her would be watching. So I treated you cold. I sold you what you needed. I never met your eyes. I never spoke a kind word, because if I had, they would have known, and they would have come for you faster. He wiped one hand across his face. I am sorry. Whatever you think of me, I am sorry. I have not slept well in 3 months. Sigrid stood very still. She looked at this big, tired, weathered man, this man who had carried her father's secret for 3 months while the whole town spat on his memory. This man who had treated her like a stranger to keep her alive. She placed her hand flat on the counter beside the list. "You did right, Mr. Thornberry," she said quietly. "Papa would have wanted you to do exactly what you did. You kept me alive." Eldred's shoulders dropped. A long, slow breath came out of him. "Eldred," he said. "Please. Just Eldred." She nodded. He picked up the list. "This is a builder's list, not a packing list, Sigrid." "I know," she said. "I am building the Steinhütten." He smiled then. For the first time since July, a small, tired smile crossed Eldred Thornberry's face. "Your father said you would. Show me where." She pulled out her father's map. She placed it on the counter. She showed him. Eldred studied it. He nodded slowly. "Granite cave, south-facing, natural chimney. Your grandfather knew his business. So did your father." He paused. "Sigrid, I cannot come up there with you. I have to stay here, where they can see me, where it looks like nothing has changed. But before you set a single stone, I'm going to teach you everything I know about building a wall that will not fall down." He reached under the counter. He pulled out a sheet of brown paper and a pencil. For 30 minutes he drew. He explained. He explained overlapping joints. How every stone in a dry stone wall must bridge the gap between two stones in the row below. So there is no continuous vertical line of weakness running from bottom to top. He drew the batter, the slight inward lean, 5 to 10 degrees from vertical, the lean that directs the weight of the wall inward and downward rather than outward and into instability. He explained the lintel, the flat spanning stone that would bridge the doorway opening, the importance of distributing weight onto its ends rather than its center. Sigrid listened the way she listened to everything that might save her life. Completely, without interruption. When he was finished, he loaded her purchases into a borrowed handcart. He added extra candles, a coil of good rope, a roll of clean cloth for bandaging, a small tin of pine tar. "You will need all of it," he said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Sigrid, be careful of Cyrus Marwick. He is the one who took their money." "I know," she said. Eldred's eyebrows lifted. "Papa left me a letter." The old man nodded slowly. "Then you know everything you need to know. Be careful, daughter. And if you need anything, do not be too proud to come back. Being proud about the wrong things has killed more people in these mountains than the cold has." She thanked him. She turned to go. At the door, she stopped. She looked back. "Eldred, he missed you. Papa. He used to say you were the only man in Silvercrest who understood a good joint." Eldred Thornberry put both hands flat on the counter. He bowed his head, and he wept. Sigrid walked out into the morning light. Bjorn rose from the porch and fell in at her side. They began the climb. "Pause for a moment with me. I want you to think about Eldred Thornberry. This man pretended to hate a grieving daughter for 3 months. He went home every night carrying the weight of that performance. He did it because her dying friend had asked him to. Do you think this was wise? Or do you think he should have stood beside her openly from the start, no matter the cost? I would love to know what you would have done in his place. Leave me a comment and tell me. Now let us return to the mountain, because Sigrid is about to start building." The first trip took most of the afternoon. The handcart was not built for mountain terrain. Sigrid loaded it as heavily as she judged she could manage, which turned out to be slightly heavier than she could comfortably manage. She stopped 4 times on the ascent, to breathe, to adjust her grip, to decide whether to remove items from the load. She kept going each time. Bjorn padded ahead and waited, then padded back, then waited again. The old dog had appointed himself her scout. He moved with the seriousness of a creature who understood his job. She cached everything inside the cave entrance. She walked back down in the early dark. The second trip the next morning brought the stove and pipe sections. The third trip on the afternoon of the 23rd of October brought the last of the food and the mortar. She set up a temporary camp at the cave entrance that evening, a bedroll on the cave floor, the tarp propped to cover the opening, a small fire of dry pine. The fire was small because she was being careful with matches. It was enough. The cave held the warmth in a way that surprised her, even though she had predicted it. The granite walls reflected the heat back instead of absorbing it away. Within 20 minutes, the ambient temperature inside the chamber had risen noticeably. She ate her supper. Beans cooked over the fire, a biscuit, coffee. She sat with the tin cup in both hands. She let herself be still. The fire made the shadows move on the granite walls. Outside, the wind ran along the ridge in long, uneven gusts. She thought about her father. Not the July version of him, the earlier version. The man who had come home from his walks along this ridge with his coat pockets full of rock samples and his eyes bright. The man who had found this cave and stood in it and thought my daughter could use this someday. In the most practical possible sense, he was still taking care of her. She was in a cave on the side of a Colorado mountain in October because he had explored it on a September afternoon 2 years ago and thought to write it down. There were worse things to carry forward from a father than that. She put the fire down to coals. Bjorn came over and lay down beside her. The old dog put his chin across her ankle. She slept. The work began at first light the next morning. She began before the sun was full on the ridge, building the fire from coals she had banked the night before, standing up to drink her coffee, eating a biscuit cold because sitting down felt like a concession to comfort she had not yet earned. The first task was not the wall. The first task was the floor. And the floor meant 2 full days of work that would leave nothing visible to stand back and assess at the end of each evening. She did it anyway, because she understood that everything coming after would rest on what she did now. She worked from the back of the chamber toward the entrance, sweeping, shoveling, carrying debris out and depositing it 20 feet down the slope. By the end of the first day, her hands were dirty to the wrist. By the end of the second day, the cave was clean. She stood at the entrance and looked back through the space, and she could see it now for what it was. Not a hole in the mountain, a room. She spent the next 3 days on the foundation work. She collected granite from the slope outside. The mountain was generous with this offering, fragments of every size, from fist size to blocks that would have required 2 men under ordinary circumstances. She wanted the mid-range pieces for foundation, roughly the size and weight of a loaf of bread, heavy enough to stay where she put them, light enough that she could place them precisely. She carried them in by hand, 2 or 3 at a time. She organized them by size along the right wall. The foundation work was unglamorous and unambiguous. She was building low stone borders along both sides of the interior, creating a raised platform in the center section, where she would sleep and live, while leaving a channel near the entrance clear for drainage. Each stone had to be placed with its flattest face upward, its most stable orientation downward, tested before she moved on. She stepped on each one. She applied her weight in a slow shift from one side to the other, listening for any movement that would mean settling later. A stone that rocked slightly could be shimmed. A stone that rocked substantially had to come out and be replaced. She did not rush this assessment. She had learned from watching her father take measurements that the discipline of doing a thing right the first time was not perfectionism. It was efficiency. Her back began registering its opinion on the 3rd day. A dull, specific complaint centered in the muscles just above her hips. That tightened overnight, and was worse in the first hour after waking. She adjusted her posture. She bent from the knees rather than the waist when she could. Her hands were developing calluses over calluses. The granite was not forgiving to skin. She wore her work gloves until they began to fail at the seams. Then she switched to wrapping strips of canvas around her palms. Bjorn watched her work. The old dog had taken up a position near the entrance, where he could see her and where he could see the trail coming up. He did not move from this position for hours at a time. He was on duty. On the 4th day of foundation work, she was moving a stone she had underestimated, perhaps 60 pounds, along a section of wet soil near the entrance. Her left foot found the slick patch before her attention did. The stone kept its momentum. She did not. Her right knee struck the granite floor with the full efficiency of gravity and poor timing. She went down sideways and stayed there. The pain was immediate and complete. She lay on her side on the cave floor, her eyes closed, her teeth pressed together, waiting for the pain to peak and begin to recede. Bjorn was at her side in an instant. The old dog whined low. He pushed his nose against her cheek. She put one hand on his head. "I am all right, Gamla vän," she whispered. "I am all right." She lay there for 10 minutes. She let herself lie there. because there was no one watching, and she was not going to perform recovery for her own benefit. And in those 10 minutes lying on the cold stone floor of a granite cave, with her knee throbbing, the question she had been keeping behind the wall of practical activity finally came through. She had spent 2 weeks building an argument for staying alive in this place, building it in numbers and lists and tool inventories. And the argument was sound. She still believed it was sound. But there was a version of reality in which she was a 20-year-old woman lying on the floor of a cave with a hurt knee and no one within a mile who knew where she was. And that version was also true. She held both versions. She did not try to resolve them into one. Then she asked herself the other question. If she walked off this mountain tomorrow and went to Denver, where would she be in 4 months? She ran the answer. She found it unchanged. The cave still represented the only path that led somewhere other than a predictable and quiet failure. She was going to stay. The decision did not need to be made again. She was just confirming it. She stood up. Her knee protested, but it worked. She redistributed her footing. Her left leg would do more of the stabilizing work for a few days. By noon, she had placed 40 more stones. The wall grew through the first week of November. Each stone had to bridge the joint between the two below it. She would pick up a stone, hold it, turn it, visualize its position, set it against the course below, check the bridge, then either place it or put it back. Some stones she tried from 3 or 4 different orientations before finding the one that worked. Some she put back in the pile entirely. The work had a quality of 3-dimensional problem solving that was cognitively demanding in a way she found unexpectedly satisfying. Not the satisfaction of easy work well done, but the satisfaction of difficult work that required her full intelligence. And received it. The wall was not going to be beautiful. That was not the point. The point was that each stone would be held in place by the combined weight and geometry of its neighbors. On the morning of the 7th of November, she heard footsteps on the trail below. Bjorn was on his feet in an instant. He went to the entrance. His hackles rose, but he did not bark. Sigrid set down the stone she was holding. She picked up her father's old hatchet. She stepped to the entrance. A man was coming up the slope, but not Cyrus Marwick. This man was older, broader through the shoulders. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had spent years navigating underground. He stopped 20 feet from the cave entrance. He stood very still. He let her see him. Frank Holloway, 44 years old. The other senior shift man at Silvercrest. The one who had not said anything at her father's funeral. The one who had not joined the chorus. The one who had simply gone home and not been seen at the cemetery again. He looked at the half-built wall. He looked at Sigrid. Neither of them spoke. For a long minute, the only sound was the wind moving through the scrub pine above the cave. Bjorn watched the man with one good eye head, tilted slightly, weighing him. Then Frank Holloway crossed his arms. "You are going to need help with the lintel," he said. It was not a question. He walked over to the stone pile. He looked through it. He found the slab she had been studying for 2 days. The flat granite piece, 4 feet long, roughly 8 inches thick, maybe 80 pounds. She had not yet figured out how to lift it into position alone. Frank Holloway lifted one end. He looked at her. "Well," he said, "it took them 40 minutes to position the lintel, building temporary supports on each side of the door opening, using a long branch as a lever, inching the slab up incrementally, checking the level with a string line. When the slab finally settled into position, resting on the support stones on each end, Sigrid did not celebrate. She checked it from 3 angles. She pressed on the center with both palms. Then she removed one of the temporary supports slowly. It held. Frank stood back. He looked at it. "Solid," he said. It was by his vocabulary a significant endorsement. He picked up his coat. He put it on. He walked to the entrance. He stopped. He did not turn around. "Magnus saved my life in '81, he said. His voice was rough. "Tunnel 2, roof crack. He pulled me out. I never forgot it. But I did not stand up for him after. I should have. I knew he was no drunk. I knew it. And I said nothing." He paused. "I am here now." Then he left. He came back the next morning with his own axe. He did not announce himself or ask what needed doing. He looked at the woodpile she had started. the beginning of what would need to be an enormous quantity of split firewood, and he began cutting. They worked within 50 feet of each other for 4 hours. They exchanged perhaps a dozen words. When he left at midday, the woodpile was measurably larger. Sigrid noted this without sentiment. It was a fact. It improved her odds. She was grateful. On the evening of the 12th of November, Sigrid heard Bjorn growl. She was inside the cave. The wall was almost complete. Only the top 3 courses remained. Bjorn was at the entrance. His one good eye was fixed on something outside. Sigrid picked up her father's hatchet. She moved to the entrance. A woman was standing 30 feet down the slope. Not Cyrus. A woman. She was holding a bundle in her arms. She was looking up at the cave with an expression Sigrid could not read. "Miss Vesterlund," the woman called softly. "Please, I am alone. I am sorry. I am alone." Sigrid recognized her then. Hannah Marwick, Cyrus Marwick's wife, 42 years old, mother of 2. The woman who had stood beside her husband at Magnus Vesterlund's funeral. The woman who had not met Sigrid's eyes when she crossed her on the road in August. Sigrid stayed at the entrance. "What do you want, Mrs. Marwick?" Hannah Marwick climbed the last of the slope, slowly, like a woman who had not slept in many nights. She stopped 10 feet from the cave entrance. She held out the bundle. "Bread," she said, "and a blanket. I made the bread tonight. I told Cyrus I was visiting my sister." Sigrid did not take the bundle. She looked at this woman in the failing November light. "Mrs. Marwick, why are you here?" Hannah Marwick's face crumpled. She did not weep loudly. She wept quietly, the way women weep when they have been holding something inside for a long time, and it has finally gotten too heavy. "Because I cannot do it anymore," she said. "I cannot. 3 months. 3 months I have watched him drink the company's money and laugh about it. 3 months I have watched this town spit on a good man's grave. 3 months I have watched you carry it. And today I watched a little girl, the Larson girl, 7 years old, spit at you outside the store. And her mother told her she was a good girl for doing it. And I stood there. And I said nothing." She lowered her arms. The bundle hung at her side. "My husband took $200 from the company to lie at the inquiry. He saw your father's letter on the supervisor's desk in April. He knew. He has known the whole time, and I knew that he knew. And I said nothing." She looked up at Sigrid. "I am not asking you to forgive me. I do not deserve it. But I have something for you." She reached into her coat. She pulled out a folded paper. "This is the agreement between Cyrus and Owen Driscoll, the supervisor. It has both their signatures. I found it 3 weeks ago in the false bottom of his desk. I have been waiting. I did not know what to do with it. I was afraid." She held it out. Sigrid did not move. Bjorn stepped forward. The old dog stood between the 2 women. He looked up at Hannah Marwick. He sniffed the bundle. He sniffed her hand. He sat down. Sigrid understood the verdict. She stepped forward. She took the bread. She took the paper. She unfolded the paper. She read it. Her father's name was in it. Twice. She folded it again. "Come inside, Mrs. Marwick. The wind is rising." Hannah Marwick followed her into the cave. She stood inside and looked around. The half-finished wall, the stove, the bedroll on the stone platform, the dog returning to his post by the entrance. She put her hand over her mouth. "Magnus told you to build this," she said. "Did he not?" "Yes." "He knew. He knew." Hannah Marwick sat down on the stone bench Sigrid had built. She put her face in her hands. "He came to my house in May," she whispered. "Your father. He came to my house. He brought me a jar of preserves my mother used to make. He sat at my table, and he told me. He said, 'Hannah, if anything ever happens to me, you go find my Sigrid. You make sure she is all right.' He knew. He knew it was coming. And I sat there and I drank tea with him, and I did not understand." She looked up. "I am sorry, Sigrid. I am so sorry." Sigrid sat down beside her on the bench. She did not embrace her. She was not yet ready for that, but she sat beside her. "Tell me everything," Sigrid said. Hannah Marwick told her. She told her about the night Cyrus came home with the $200, about the bottle he opened to celebrate, about the things he had said when he was drunk, about Driscoll, about the false bottom in the desk, about the other miners who suspected but said nothing because they had families, about the way the company had structured the inquiry so that only Cyrus's testimony mattered. She talked for an hour. Sigrid listened. When Hannah Marwick was finished, she stood up. She wiped her face. He will know I was gone too long. I have to go. Mrs. Marwick. Hannah, please. Hannah, does he hurt you? Hannah Marwick looked at the floor. He has not yet. But he is changing. The money is gone. He is drinking it faster than he can earn. He blames me for things. The children are afraid of him. I do not know how long. She trailed off. If you need to come here, Sigrid said quietly, you come here, you and the children. The door will open. Hannah Marwick nodded. She could not speak. She left. Sigrid hid the agreement in the secret hollow her father had made, behind the stone, with the rock samples, with the letters, with the truth. She finished the wall on the morning of November 15th. She set the last stones in the crown course. She stepped back. She looked at it from inside the cave. Then she went outside and looked at it from the mountain. It was not uniform. The stones varied in color and size in the way that local granite varied. The courses were not perfectly horizontal. They followed the natural topography of the opening rather than an imposed line, but it stood straight in its overall profile. It was thick and stable at its base, and it had the particular visual quality of something that belongs to the landscape that produced it, rather than something imposed on that landscape from outside. She set the door over the following 2 days, rough planks, iron hinges, the frame bedded in mortar at the contact points with the stone, the gaps caulked with clay and dry grass. She lit the stove for the first time on the evening of November 17th. She laid the fire with dry kindling. She lit it with one match. She stood back. The smoke went up. It rose into the pipe. It traveled to the fissure. It was drawn up and out by the draft, as cleanly as if the chimney had been engineered. The fire caught and grew. Within 40 minutes, the air in the chamber had moved from the cave's baseline cold to something genuinely warm. She placed her palm flat against the granite wall. For the first time, she felt warmth in the stone itself, not surface warmth from the nearby fire, the deeper, slower warmth of thermal mass beginning to absorb. The granite was taking the heat, the way granite took everything, slowly, completely, and with the intention of keeping it. Bjorn lay down beside the stove. He sighed, the way old dogs sigh when they have finally found a warm spot. Sigrid cooked supper. She ate it sitting on the stone platform, her father's journal open on her knee. Outside, the wind was rising along the ridge. She did not know yet what was coming, but she could feel it in the air. The pressure was dropping. The wind was steadying into a long, organized push from the northwest, the kind of wind that had a system behind it. She looked at Bjorn. The old dog was awake again, his head up, his ears forward. Storm coming, gamle ven. He gave one small, low woof. She banked the fire. She checked the door. She checked the stovepipe. She checked the food stores. She checked the water she had set aside. Then she sat down by the stove, and she waited. Take a breath with me. Sigrid has done what almost no one in that town believes she could do. She has built a stone wall, fitted a door, lit a stove, and brought the warmth into a mountain. She has gathered the evidence to clear her father's name. She has found 2 allies in the most unlikely places, but the worst is still ahead of her, because the pressure outside that cave is dropping fast. And up in the high country, a storm is gathering that will write itself into the local memory for the next 60 years. So before we go into the dark, I want you to do one thing. If you believe Sigrid is going to make it through what is coming next, hit the like button right now. Let me see how many of you are with her. Then we go on. The storm came on the morning of November 19th. It came without much warning. Sigrid was splitting wood outside the cave at mid-morning when the quality of the air changed, the pressure dropping, the temperature falling through a threshold rather than along a slope, the smell of the air shifting to something metallic and enormous. She had lived in Silvercrest long enough to know what that combination meant. She loaded one final armful of cut wood and carried it inside. She began closing the remaining gaps around the doorframe. She was working against the clock now. The sky to the northwest was going the specific gray of a system that meant business. The snow started at mid-afternoon, first as scattered flakes that seemed undecided, then within 30 minutes as a solid horizontal curtain, driven by wind that came off the ridge in long, organized gusts. The temperature began to drop. By dusk, it was 0. By the time true night came on, it was 20 below. By midnight, it was 38 below 0. Outside, the wind was running at a steady 40 miles an hour, with gusts that exceeded 70. Sigrid built her fire up. She checked the seal of the door. She sat on the stone platform with Bjorn beside her and her father's journal open on her knee. And she listened to the mountain. The wall did not move. The door did not flex. The stovepipe drew clean and steady. The fissure above pulled the smoke up and out the way it had pulled the smoke of unknown earlier visitors a generation ago. The granite walls began to give back the heat they had absorbed during the day. Inside the chamber, the temperature held above 55 degrees. Outside the chamber, it was 40 below. Down in the valley in the company town of Silvercrest, the storm was a different kind of event. The company houses were built of pine board, single-walled, with chimneys that leaked heat as fast as the stoves could produce it. By the second night of the storm, 7 houses had partial roof collapses under the weight of accumulated snow. By the third night, the wood piles outside most homes were buried under 5 feet of drift, and the wood at the bottom was wet from refreeze cycles, and it would not burn. The miners who had not built proper storm stores were burning their furniture by the third day. By the fourth day, an old Swedish woman named Astrid Lindblom, who lived alone in a house at the eastern edge of camp, was found by her neighbor at first light. She had run out of dry wood on the second night. She had tried to walk to the next house. She had not made it past her own front porch. She was 67 years old. She had been one of the few people in Silvercrest who had spoken kindly of Magnus Vesterlund after his death. The neighbor wept when he found her. In the Holloway house, Frank Holloway and his wife were rationing wood carefully. Frank had built his own woodshed against the north side of the house earlier that fall. He had not insulated it, but he had at least kept the snow off. His wood was dry. They would make it. In the Marwick house, Cyrus Marwick was drunk. He had been drunk since the night the storm started. He had been drunk in a way that was different from his usual drunkenness. Angrier, louder. He had not let Hannah light a proper fire because he said it would draw too much of their dwindling wood supply. By the third night, 2/3 of their roof had given way under the snow. Hannah Marwick and her 2 children, Anna and small Peter, had retreated to the kitchen, the one room that still had a sound ceiling. Cyrus had passed out in the front parlor under 3 coats and a broken chair he had been chopping for the fire. Hannah looked at her children. She looked at the kitchen door. She made a decision she had been making slowly for 3 months. She put Anna and Peter in every coat she could find. She wrote a note. She left it on the table. She did not bother taking anything else. She picked up Peter, who was 6 years old. She took Anna by the hand. Anna was 9. She stepped out into the storm. The mile to the cave was the longest mile of her life. In the cave, Bjorn began to bark. Sigrid set down her journal. She rose from the stone platform. Bjorn was at the door, his one good eye fixed on the wood. His tail was not wagging, but his bark was not a threat bark. It was something else, something high, something urgent. Sigrid put her ear to the door. She heard nothing but wind. She unlatched the door. She opened it a crack. A woman fell forward into the cave, a woman holding a small child, a second child slightly larger clinging to her coat. Hannah Marwick, Anna Marwick, Peter Marwick, all 3 of them blue at the lips, faces white with frost. Hannah Marwick's eyes barely open. Sigrid did not think. She pulled them inside. She kicked the door shut. She dropped the bar. She took small Peter from Hannah's arms. The boy was barely conscious. His breath was shallow and slow. She set him by the stove. She pulled Anna's frozen coat off. She wrapped the child in her own bedroll. She turned back to Hannah. The woman had collapsed against the inner wall. She was trying to speak. "Cyrus," Hannah whispered. "He is in the house. The roof. He does not know we left. I could not wake him. I could not." Sigrid placed her hand on Hannah's face. "Stay here. Warm the children. Bjorn will stay with you. I will come back." Hannah's eyes opened wider. "You cannot go out in this. You cannot. He is the father of these children." Sigrid pulled on her father's heaviest coat. She wrapped her face in cloth. She tied her boots tight. She looked at Bjorn. Stay gamla vän, guard them. The old dog sat down beside Peter. He laid his chin across the small boy's chest. He did not move. Sigrid stepped out into the storm. She had walked that mountain in every weather she could imagine, but she had never walked it in anything like this. The wind hit her with a force she felt in her bones. The temperature pulled the moisture out of her skin within seconds. She could not see 10 feet in front of her. She walked downhill. She walked by feel, by the slope, by the shape of the trees she could touch, by the memory of every step she had taken between the cave and the camp. It took her 90 minutes to cover what should have taken 30. She found the Marwick house by its sagging silhouette in the white. The front door was open. Banging in the wind, she went inside. The cold inside the house was almost as deep as the cold outside. The roof had collapsed further. Snow had drifted into the parlor and onto Cyrus Marwick. He was lying under the broken chair and the coats. His face was gray. She knelt beside him. He was breathing. Barely. She slapped his face, hard. Marwick, wake up. He groaned. Marwick, Hannah is alive. Your children are alive. They are in the cave. Get up or you die in this house. His eyes opened. They were not focused. What? Your wife, your children. They walked out. They are in my cave. They are alive. Get up. Now. He tried to sit up. He could not. Sigrid Vesterlund hauled Cyrus Marwick into a sitting position. She slapped his face again. She made him drink from her flask. Whiskey. Her father's. She had brought it for emergencies. She got him to his feet. He was 44 years old. He was over 200 pounds. He was disoriented and drunk and freezing. She got him out of the house. She wrapped her arm around him, and she walked him up the mountain. The walk back took 3 hours. It was almost dawn when they reached the cave. Hannah Marwick opened the door before Sigrid could knock. The fire was burning steady. The children were warm. Bjorn was at his post. She saw her husband. She did not speak. Sigrid pushed Cyrus through the doorway. He stumbled forward. He fell to his knees on the cave floor. Hannah looked at her. Sigrid nodded. He is your husband. Whatever you decide, he is alive. She closed the door. She dropped the bar. She stood in the cave with 2 children, a frostbitten woman, a drunk man, and an old dog. While outside the mountain raged, she set water to boil. The silence in the cave was the kind of silence that does not ask for words. It simply asks to be allowed to exist. The cave held the warmth. The storm lasted 9 days in total. By the 3rd day, more people had come. Frank Holloway and his wife arrived on the 5th day. They had been holding out in their own house, but the roof had finally begun to fail. Frank had remembered Sigrid's cave. He brought his wife. He brought the Henderson family. He brought the Larson woman whose 7-year-old daughter had spat at Sigrid 2 weeks ago. He brought a young miner's son named Tobias, 9 years old, whose hands were white and would never feel quite right again. By the 7th day, there were 17 people in the cave. 17 people, and 1 old dog, and Sigrid Vesterlund. Eldred Thornberry came on the 8th day. He came late. He came because no one else had thought of him in the panic. He had been in his store alone, his stove burning low. He had walked up the slope in the lull of the wind. He came in covered in frost. Sigrid took his face in her hands and pressed her forehead to his. Eldred. Daughter. He sat down by the fire. The cave held them all. It held them through the worst of the cold. It held them through the long days when the wind would not stop. It held them through the night when little Peter Marwick stopped breathing for a full minute, and Sigrid worked over him by lamplight until he gasped again and clutched at his sister's coat. It held them. On the 6th night, when the children were asleep and the lamps were low, Cyrus Marwick spoke. He had not spoken in 3 days. He spoke from where he sat, against the wall, his face turned away from his wife, from his children, from Sigrid. I want to say this, he said. I want to say this while you are all here, because I do not deserve to say it later in private. The cave was quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to lower itself. Cyrus Marwick took a long breath. Magnus Vesterlund was not a drunk. He was not careless. He warned the company about Tunnel 4 in April. I saw his letter on Owen Driscoll's desk with my own eyes. Driscoll laughed about it. He paid me $200 to testify that Magnus had been drinking on the day of the collapse. I took the money. I lied. I told this town that this woman's father killed 7 men, and then I helped them spit on his grave. And then I threatened his daughter on the mountain trail and told her she would not see the spring. He paused. And now I am here, in a shelter she built, with my wife and my children who would all be dead by morning if she had not walked into a storm to drag me out of a collapsed house. I do not deserve to be here. I do not deserve her bread. I do not deserve her fire. He turned his head. He looked at Sigrid for the first time in 3 months. I was wrong, I am sorry. I will testify. I will write it. I will sign it. I will say it in front of any judge in Denver or this state. Whatever happens to me after I deserve. But your father's name will be cleared. I swear it. The cave was silent. Father Bramwell, the camp's preacher, who had presided at Magnus Vesterlund's funeral with such bitter words, rose slowly from his seat. He was 53 years old. He had been one of the 17 people Sigrid had taken in. He walked across the cave. He knelt before Sigrid Vesterlund. I called your father a careless man in the church. I said God would not receive him as readily as a sober man. I said these things from the pulpit. I said them with conviction, and I was wrong. I am sorry, daughter. Forgive an old fool. Forgive a man of God who forgot the most basic instruction of his calling, which is to listen before he speaks. Sigrid stood up. She placed her hand on the old preacher's shoulder. Stand up, father. The floor is cold. He stood. She turned to the cave. She looked at all of them, sleeping children, bandaged hands, Eldred by the fire, Hannah holding Peter against her chest, Frank Holloway sitting with his back against the granite wall. She did not say anything for a long time. When she did speak, her voice was quiet. My father is dead. Nothing said in this cave will bring him back. But I will tell you what he believed. He believed that stone remembers heat and wood forgets. He believed that you build for the people who will come after you. He built this place for me. He did not know how many of us would be in it tonight, but I think he would not be unhappy. So eat the bread. Warm yourselves at the fire. Be alive tomorrow. That is what he would have wanted. That is what I want. She sat back down. Bjorn came over to her. The old dog put his head in her lap. She placed her hand on his head. Outside, the wind began finally to drop. The storm broke on the morning of November 28th. The sun came up clean and cold over the eastern ridge. The world was buried in white. Every tree was bent. Every roof in the camp below was either down or sagging. The 17 people in Sigrid's cave came out blinking into the light. They climbed down the slope together. They returned to a town that had lost 11 of its own in the storm. They returned to homes that needed to be rebuilt. They returned to a community that would never speak of Magnus Vesterlund the same way again. Cyrus Marwick walked into the sheriff's office in Leadville the next week. He gave a sworn deposition. He named Owen Driscoll. He named 2 other company men. He produced the agreement Hannah had taken from his desk. I want to stop here for one moment, because something happened in that cave that I want you to think about. Sigrid Vesterlund had every reason in the world to leave Cyrus Marwick in his collapsed house. He had lied about her father. He had threatened her on a mountain trail. He had taken the money that bought the destruction of her family's name, and yet she walked into the worst storm of the decade and dragged him up a mountain. Was that strength? Was that weakness? Was it something else entirely? I would love to hear what you think. Tell me in the comments, because I am still working it out myself. Sigrid Vesterlund met Mr. Crow at Eldred Thornberry's store on the first Saturday in April of 1884. He was 45 years old, lean, with the particular quality of attention in his eyes that she associated with men who looked at things long enough to understand them. He came in. He shook Eldred's hand. He turned to her. Miss Vesterlund, Mr. Crow. She took him up the mountain. He climbed beside her without complaint. Bjorn patted at her heel. She showed him the cave. She showed him the wall. She showed him the stove, the chimney fissure, the thermal platform, the way the granite gave back the heat. He took out a small notebook. He wrote in it for 10 minutes without speaking. Then she showed him the hidden hollow, the rock samples, the April letter, the second copy, the Marwick-Driscoll agreement. He sat down on the stone bench. He read everything. When he was finished, he closed his notebook. He looked up at her. Miss Vesterlund, I have been investigating the Silvercrest Mining Company for 2 years. I have suspected what your father documented. I could not prove it. I can prove it now. Your father was right. The company will be held to account. I am sorry for what they did. I am sorry for what this town did. I am sorry for what you have carried. Sigrid nodded. Mr. Crow, the company will offer me money. Yes. How much? My best guess. $2,000. I want 1,500 of it to go to the 7 families. The ones who lost men in the tunnel, equally divided. Mr. Crow wrote it down. And the other 500? Sigrid looked out the door of the cave, down the slope, toward the place where her father was buried. I want one line in the official report. I want it written in the regulatory record. Magnus Vesterlund warned the Silvercrest Mining Company about the structural condition of tunnel number 4 in a letter dated April 14, 1883. His warning was correct. His warning was ignored. He died in the very collapse he predicted. She paused. That is what I want. Mr. Crow wrote it down. He looked up. It will be in the report, Miss Vesterlund. I give you my word. The report was filed with the Colorado Mining Regulatory Office in June of 1884. It said exactly what she had asked it to say. Owen Driscoll was indicted in August. He served 4 years. Cyrus Marwick was indicted as a co-conspirator. The court took into consideration his sworn testimony and his role in producing evidence. He served 18 months. When he came out, his wife was waiting for him. She had thought about it for a long time. She had decided to give him one more chance. He never drank again. The Silvercrest Mining Company paid out the settlement. Sigrid distributed $1,500 among the 7 families. She kept $500. She used $300 of it to pay her debt to Eldred Thornberry for the months of food he had given her on credit and would never have asked her to repay. He took it because she insisted. He used it to buy his wife the small gold cross she had wanted for 10 years. Sigrid stayed in Silvercrest through the summer of 1884. She had thought she would leave. She had thought she would go to Denver or perhaps further west. But Eldred Thornberry asked her one morning while she was helping him with his books whether she might consider staying. He needed help running the store. His hands were getting old. The accounts were getting away from him. She said yes. She moved into the small room above the store. She kept the cave. She walked up to it twice a month. She checked the wall. She checked the door. She checked the stovepipe. She sat for an hour on the stone platform with Bjorn at her feet. Mr. Crow came back in August. He had business in Leadville. He stopped at the store. He spoke with Sigrid for an hour over coffee. He came back in October. He came back in January. He came back in March. In the spring of 1886, he asked her to marry him. She said yes. They were married in June. Eldred Thornberry walked her up the aisle. They built a house together on the eastern slope of Silvercrest. Daniel Crow drew the structural plans. Sigrid drew the thermal plans. The south wall was 24-inch granite. The north wall was double timbered with sawdust insulation. The woodshed was dug 4 feet into the slope behind the house and roofed with timber and turf. On the coldest recorded night of the winter of 1887, the house held 62 degrees while burning a quarter of the wood that the company houses below were burning to hold the same temperature. In 1889, there was a stamp mill fire that killed 2 miners and their wives. Sigrid and Daniel took in their children, a girl of 7 and a boy of 9. The Crows raised them as their own. The 2 children grew up in the house on the eastern slope with the granite wall on the south side and the view of the peaks that they came to take for granted, because it was what they had always seen. In 1891, Bjorn died. He died old. He died in his sleep on the rug in front of the stove with his chin resting on Sigrid's foot. He was 16 years old. Sigrid buried him in the garden behind the house. She carved the stone herself. The inscription read in Norwegian, Han så alt, han forrådte aldrig. He saw everything. He never betrayed. She wept for the first time since she had been 20 years old. She wept hard and long. Daniel Crow held her without speaking, because some griefs are old and have been waiting a long time to come out. In 1892, a professor named Halford Alderton from a Colorado engineering school published a paper. He had heard about the cave from Eldred Thornberry, who had told the story to a traveling surveyor who had told it to a professor in Denver. The paper was titled Passive Thermal Design in High-Altitude Emergency Shelter, a case study from the San Juan Mountains, 1883. It described the cave's natural properties, the construction decisions Sigrid had made, the thermal performance data Alderton had compiled, the way the design had influenced subsequent construction practices in the surrounding area. The paper credited Magnus Vesterlund in its second paragraph as the man who had discovered and documented the cave site. It credited Sigrid Vesterlund Crow in the same paragraph as the designer and builder. It was Alderton wrote in his introduction an example of necessity-driven engineering, the kind of design thinking that emerged when resource constraints were absolute and there was no option of over-engineering and no option of buying a solution. In 1947, a section of the overhang above the cave entrance gave way after a heavy spring rain. The rockfall sealed the cave from the outside, but inside the wall still stood. The door was still on its hinges. The stove was still connected to the fissure. Magnus Vesterlund's journal was still on the shelf where Sigrid had left it. In 1978, researchers from a Colorado engineering school built a replica of the Stein-Hitten according to the published drawings. They measured its thermal performance against modern timber construction. The replica held heat 2.4 times longer. They wrote a second paper. In it, they noted that the technique used in the cave was a clear ancestor of modern passive house design. They noted that the principles applied by Sigrid Vesterlund were the same principles used in 20th century polar research stations. They credited her name and her father's and the Norwegian valley they came from. Daniel Crow died in 1928. He was 89 years old. He died at home in the bed in the house he had built with his wife. She was beside him. He held her hand, and he was at peace. Sigrid lived another 34 years. She ran Eldred Thornberry's store until 1920. Eldred himself had died in 1898, and he had left her the store in his will, along with a letter that said, "You were the daughter I never had. Magnus's daughter, my daughter. Forgive an old Cornishman for the cold months I gave you." She sold the store in 1920 to a younger family. She kept the house on the eastern slope. She walked up to the cave twice a year, spring and fall. Even after the rockfall sealed it in 1947, she would walk to the place where the entrance had been. She would sit on a flat stone. She would talk to her father, and to Daniel, and to Bjorn. Her children visited often, her grandchildren more often than that. 2 of her grandchildren became engineers. The eldest had grown up hearing about the cave at Sunday dinners. He had studied at the same Colorado school where Halford Alderton had taught. In 1955, when Sigrid was 92 years old, he brought her the early findings from a new university project that had just begun studying the cave's thermal properties. The preliminary numbers in the report were the same numbers she had felt against her palm the first night she lit the stove. She read it slowly. She read it twice. She set it on her lap. "They got it right," she said softly. "Papa got it right." She died in the spring of 1962. She was 99 years old. She died in her sleep in the same bed where Daniel had died 34 years before. Her grandchildren were in the next room. Her great-grandchildren were playing in the garden where Bjorn was buried. The peaks of the San Juans were visible through her window. Her last words the day before had been spoken to her great-granddaughter, a young woman of 19, just home from her first year of engineering school. The first woman in the family to study what Magnus and Sigrid had built with their hands. "Papa always said, 'Stone remembers heat. Wood forgets. Always stone.'" The girl wrote it down. She kept it in her wallet for the rest of her life. In 2003, the principles documented in Halford Alderton's 1892 paper were cited in the official certification standards for passive house construction in North America. The granite hollow on the western ridge of Silvercrest still sits beneath the fallen overhang. The wall behind the rockfall has not moved. The door is still on its hinges. The stove is still connected to the fissure. Magnus Vesterlund's journal in its leather cover is still on the shelf, cut into the granite wall. A homesteading historical society has marked the location with a small bronze plaque. It bears 2 names, Magnus Vesterlund, Sigrid Vesterlund Crow, and 1 line. "Stone remembers heat. Wood forgets. Always stone." Sigrid Vesterlund did not build a granite shelter on a Colorado mountain in October of 1883 to prove a point. She built it because her father had taught her how. She built it because she had nowhere else to go. She built it because she was 20 years old and alone, and she had a half-blind dog and $47 and a town that hated her and a winter coming that wanted to kill her. She built it because the things we build when we are trying to survive have a way of lasting longer than the things we build for any other reason. Her father knew this. Her grandfather knew this. And the mountain remembers her. It always will. And if you ever pass through southwestern Colorado and you climb the western ridge above the old company town of Silvercrest, and you stand at the place where the granite overhang has fallen, listen for a moment. The wind comes off the high peaks the way it has come for 10,000 years. The aspens shiver. The cold makes itself known. But underneath all of it, if you stand very still, you might feel something else. A small, steady warmth, coming from the stone behind the rockfall. The stone that Sigrid Vesterlund stacked with her own bruised hands in the October of 1883. The stone that is still holding the heat, still doing the work, still keeping its promise to a 20-year-old girl who had nowhere else to go. Stone remembers. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the strongest people in our lives are the ones who never tell us they are strong. They just keep building, stone by stone, day by day, until the wall holds. Good night.